All right, now let's take it on to East Africa now. We see Kenya, the fastest growing economy in Africa, have suffered a setback there with protests that claimed the lives of people, with a big standoff between the government in Kenya and the youths of Kenyans on the finance bill. Let's hear what President William Ruto had to say yesterday.
And listening keenly to the people of Kenya, who have said loudly that they want nothing to do with this Finance Bill 2024, I concede, and therefore I will not sign the 2024 Finance Bill, and it shall subsequently be withdrawn, and I have agreed with these members that becomes our collective position.
All right, let's bring in Wachira Kariuki now, finance consultant in Kenya. Great to have you, Wachira.
Very well, Ladi. It's such a pleasure to be here to discuss East African markets and Kenya in particular. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for coming on. So I see Kenyan youth spoke with one voice against the bill, but sadly, people had to die for this.
Yes, the youth came, we call them the Gen Z. They have been able to rally around Twitter, Facebook, and social media. They've been able to pretty much coordinate and communicate among themselves. So they turned out in very large numbers, and unfortunately some of them passed on, but they were able to pass a very clear message on the way, their path, their interests, and their needs, and they've been had to be listened to by the government. It's quite unfortunate. So we think that all things considered, that it's a time of a change for the country in Kenya in particular, and we are hopeful that we shall keep on getting better and more changes as we go forward, irrespective of the 13 people who passed on. Ladi, thank you.
And we know Kenya owes about $80 billion and is desperate for cash at this point, and raising taxes, that option seems to be off the table at this time. What other options are there? Can the government cut spending at this point?
Yes, for sure, Ladi. The government has cut spending quite a bit. There have been a bit of recommendations. There has been a consistent insistence that government spending changes. There's a lot of recurrent expenditure and, of course, a lot of corruption and a lot of wasted money. So the citizens made it clear that that bill just requires the Kenyan citizens and the government at large to restructure their consumption and expenditure, avoid taking unnecessary debts, and, of course, make sure that the budget makes sense. Because as we speak, some of the things that really angered the youth was that the wife to the president has a $1 billion budget. The wife to the vice president has I think, $1.6 billion budget. So this small unnecessary costing is what the Kenyan Republic is completely unhappy with. And they are saying it's time to change, and they are pushing the agenda, and they've finally been heard. So there are very clear ways and means of cutting expenditure as a country. But there had to be motivation to the elite and the governing class for them to do the right thing. And I think finally they have done that, and they will. By withdrawing the bill.
And I believe the IMF actually recommended this tax bill. I guess the IMF didn't see this coming. And do you think other recommendations should be considered at this time?
Correct, yes. The IMF underestimated the reply and the acceptance of this bill by the public. But I'm happy to say that the public has come out very clearly. There's a specific generation of people who have not participated in governance matters. There's a category of individuals in the country who have not participated regarding corporate governance and, of course, measures and policy making. They have not been included, but now they have. And so the IMF did not counter or expect that, and I suspect they have to go back to the drawing board, which they didn't expect the reaction, but they've always insisted on those measures being taken. So I think now the government is finally able to listen, although there's speculation that some of these problems are actually caused by IMF. But we want to see if the bill is, at least with the bill being dropped, we can now reassess the situation, and the government is forced to readdress the problem in a more strategic and intelligent manner that leaves all of us better. Remember, this is a growing class of people who are below 30, so the next 10 years of governance are going to affect them more than anybody else. So it's important and necessary to do what they think is best and find a middle ground between what government is trying to do and what is good for the citizens of the country at large, Ladi. Thank you.
I guess the Gen Zs are fighting for themselves at this point, but help us quantify the impact of the protests on the Kenyan economy.
Very well. Good question, Ladi. So as at yesterday, unfortunately, our Eurobond, which is the first of its kind, has been downgraded. right, by the moods, by the Moody. So what happens is that it means they think our debt as a country is a bit more risky. It simply means this political risk that is attached to the bond. Remember, Eurobond is Kenya borrowing money in dollars from the public and by extension the diaspora. Right, so it has been downgraded, which means it's a lot more risky. So a government, an entity, a corporate, a government trading that particular bond and holding it simply means that there is a small chance that it's a bit of a problematic bond to hold. But we hope that the stability that came literally the following day is going to stabilize and maybe we can be reinstated to where we were. Moody's and Poor is a company that rates bonds worldwide. And so they downgraded us yesterday morning in light of what was happening, and the dollar also slightly lost from 127 to around 129 as of today. But in light of the robust measures and the political stability we have had because the military kicked in, and of course there are now conversations between different political parties. The president, of course, is very willing, and of course the protests today have whittled down a little bit, and there is not as much anticipation and heat, so to speak, and there's a bit more stability, especially in counties around Nairobi, because this was 35 counties that participated in this particular crisis. So there's a bit more consolidation, and we think economically speaking, things will be fine. However, there was a bit of transition with a number of Kenyans traveling out of the country. The airport was gridlocked quite a bit. Flights were taking off quite fast because there are a lot of people who are buying tickets to leave the country. Of course, especially foreigners, they didn't really know how long this would take. They didn't know the effect of it. And especially because the president was a bit hasty in calling in the military. So there was a bit of concern regarding us turning to a military state and us going into a crisis, so to speak. So foreigners, not understanding the depth of the problem or how quickly it would be, chose to exit. The shilling has suffered. Our bonds have been downgraded and suffered a little bit, but we think it was just momentary, and the country at large is still fine and we're going to stabilize and go on fine, so to speak. I'm saying that because we are starting the half year in next week. We're starting in July, which is 6 months into the year. So we are hoping that it does not affect the half-year operations of most investment banks, commercial banks, manufacturers, exporters, importers. And we think this was a one-off thing, which was fueled by the Gen Zs. But now there's a bit more stability going forward. It's not a political year. We're not in elections. So it's a bubble. It was an unfortunate problem, but it has been handled quantitatively. And I think the political class did the right thing in the president calling all the citizens and addressing them in his capacity as a president to bring peace and stability and an assurance that all will be well going forward, Ladi.
And we definitely hope for more peace and stability right there in Kenya. Thank you so much. Wachira Karuki is a finance consultant right there in Kenya.
Always a pleasure, Ladi. Thank you.